He was the man everyone trusted. The one who waved when you pulled into your driveway. The one who volunteered for community watch, helped change a flat tire, and shoveled snow from the sidewalks in winter. He didn't just look safe. He was safety, or so everyone thought. But behind those neatly trimmed hedges, behind the warm smile and the open-door friendliness, he kept secrets. Secrets sealed behind concrete. Secrets that would one day crawl out of the ground, begging to be heard. And when they were finally uncovered, decades later, the truth wouldn't just break hearts. It would shatter an entire neighborhood's sense of safety. Because the man they trusted the most had been the predator hiding in plain sight. The neighborhood wasn't glamorous. Just rows of modest, post-war homes in a quiet American suburb. A place where families raised their children, where block parties lit up the summers, where Halloween nights saw kids darting between porches without fear. And at the very center of it all was Richard Hale. Richard was 53, a widower with no children of his own. He had lived in the neighborhood for nearly 3 decades. To most, he was dependable, steady, the man who fixed his gutters every fall and pruned his rose bushes each spring. He chaired the neighborhood watch committee. He lent out his tools. He'd check on elderly neighbors, drive them to doctor's appointments, and hand out popsicles to kids on sweltering afternoons. People said, if you could pick a neighbor, you'd want a guy like Richard. But no one ever really looked too closely. No one questioned why Richard never seemed to have friends over. Why his curtains stayed drawn even in the middle of the day. Why the basement windows of his home had been painted black from the inside. In the summer of 1999, a 15-year-old girl named Amy Preston vanished on her walk home from the library. Her house was less than a mile away. She never made it. The community searched. Flyers went up. Dogs combed the woods. For weeks, her face haunted every lamppost and every grocery store entrance. Richard joined the search parties. He walked shoulder to shoulder with her parents, flashlight in hand. He was even photographed handing out water bottles to the volunteers. And when the search ended in nothing but heartbreak, Richard stood with everyone else at the candlelight vigil, head bowed. Police had no leads. The case went cold. In the years that followed, more teenagers disappeared. A boy walking home from basketball practice. A young woman whose car broke down on the highway. A college student last seen jogging near the park. Different ages, different lives, but always the same community grief. The same unanswered questions. And through it all, Richard Hale was there. He offered sympathy. He spoke at town meetings. He urged vigilance. It was almost poetic. The man who hid his crimes became the face of safety. By 2019, Richard's home had stood empty for nearly a decade. He'd passed away quietly in his sleep, his secrets buried with him. The house fell into foreclosure, then decay. Until one spring morning, renovation crews were sent in. The workers stripped old wallpaper, tore up carpeting, and began planning to get the basement, a space that had been sealed off for years. They expected mold. Maybe rats. Nothing more. But what they found was something else entirely. Behind a false wall in the basement, a space no larger than a storage room had been bricked shut. The mortar was old, crumbling. One swing of the sledgehammer split it open. And when the dust settled, the workers froze. Inside were boxes. Dozens of them. Each carefully labeled with names and dates. And inside those boxes were photographs, journals, articles of clothing, and something darker still. Bones, neatly stacked, hidden for decades. The police were called. The crime scene tape went up. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering in disbelief. And slowly, the picture began to form. This wasn't just the forgotten junk of an old man. It was evidence. Evidence of crimes no one ever believed could happen here. The discovery in Richard Hale's basement was the spark that reignited a fire long thought dead. Boxes filled with trophies. Bones stacked like relics. And journals, written in the same steady handwriting that neighbors had once seen scribbling grocery lists. The press swarmed. The quiet neighborhood turned into a circus of cameras and satellite trucks. Headlines screamed, "Remains found in basement of respected neighbor. Predator in plain sight?" But the truth was, this wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the middle. The beginning had started 20 years earlier, with a missing girl and a community that wanted answers. Amy Preston was 15 years old the summer she disappeared. Bright-eyed, studious, shy in a way that made teachers describe her as sweet. She loved the library, spending hours tucked into the corner chair reading Nancy Drew novels. On June 14th, she signed out the clue of the tapping heels. She never came home. Witnesses last saw her walking down Maple Street, cutting through the neighborhood where Richard Hale's house stood. Police canvassed door to door. They interviewed residents. Richard answered calmly, inviting officers in. He even joked about the mess in his kitchen, offering them lemonade. The search for Amy lasted weeks. Helicopters hovered. K9 units sniffed trails that led nowhere. And as summer turned to fall, hope dissolved. Her parents clung to one detail: Amy would never run away. But the police, with no body and no leads, eventually closed the case. It would stay that way for decades. Amy was not the last. 2002, Brian Keller. 17, last seen leaving basketball practice. His sneakers were later found abandoned in the park. 2005, Dana Richards. 19, college freshman. Her car was discovered broken down on the highway shoulder. No sign of her. 2007, Laura Green. 21, part-time waitress. She vanished walking home after her late-night shift. Each disappearance shook the community, but no one linked them together, not officially. Police insisted there was no pattern. Different circumstances, different ages. But residents whispered. Parents locked their doors tighter. Neighbors warned daughters not to walk alone. And still, Richard Hale's name never came up. He was at every vigil, every meeting. Always the calm voice saying, "We must stay strong." It worked. People believed him. Years later, investigators would comb through the old case files, stunned by what they missed. Amy Preston's library book, found weeks later in a donation box at a church, less than 2 blocks from Richard's house. No one tested it for fingerprints. Brian Keller's sneakers, discovered in the park, less than 200 yards from Richard's backyard. Police assumed Brian abandoned them during a fight. A witness report. In 2007, a neighbor claimed she saw Laura Green talking to a man in a dark sedan. She couldn't recall the plates. The sketch she gave was never circulated. When the files were reopened, it became clear. The predator had been hiding in plain sight, manipulating every angle, feeding off the blind spots in the system. In 2019, after the workers found the hidden basement, investigators pored over the journals Richard left behind. Each was meticulous. Each chronicled dates, times, places. Each written in a tone disturbingly ordinary. One entry read, July 3rd. She trusted me. Said she was scared when the car broke down. I told her I'd help. She smiled. She didn't know. The smile made it harder. I almost let her go. Another. December 14th. The snow muffled everything. No one heard. I buried the box under the rose bushes until I could move it. They weren't just journals. They were confessions. The neighborhood reeled. How could we not know? One woman asked reporters, clutching her child. He was the guy we trusted to walk our kids home when it got dark. Another whispered. Some refused to believe it. They insisted Richard was framed, that the evidence was planted. Others turned their grief inward, blaming themselves for every wave and smile exchanged across the fence. But the truth was clear. Richard Hale had built his camouflage out of kindness. And it had worked for decades. After the news broke, people started talking. A woman named Kelly, now in her 30s, came forward. She remembered being 12, walking home from school, when Richard offered her a ride. She declined, but he followed slowly in his car until she reached her driveway. At the time, she thought he was just being neighborly. Now she wasn't so sure. Another man recalled babysitting nearby and hearing strange noises from Richard's basement at night. Thuds, dragging sounds. He dismissed them as plumbing. The survivors' stories painted a chilling picture. Richard had been testing boundaries, probing weaknesses, choosing his moments. And when the time was right, he acted. Detectives cross-referenced the journals with missing persons reports. The names matched. The dates matched. Boxes recovered from the basement contained scraps of clothing. A shoelace, a necklace, a hair ribbon. Each carefully preserved. Each belonging to someone who had never come home. One officer, hardened by decades on the force, broke down in tears as he carried a box out of the house. This isn't just evidence, he whispered. These are people's lives. Amid the rows of neatly stacked boxes, one was different. It was larger, heavier. Its label didn't have a name, just a date. Inside wasn't a trophy. It was a VHS tape, dusty, marked only with the number 12. Investigators carried it to the lab, hearts heavy with dread. They pressed play. The screen crackled to life. And what they saw would change everything. Boxes of bones. Journals written in a steady, chilling hand. Trophies cataloged like a collector's prized stamps. And then, the box without a name. Inside, a VHS tape marked only with the number 12. Detectives slid it into the player, unsure whether to look away. The tape opened with static. A warbled hum filled the room as the grainy footage sharpened. At first it looked harmless, a simple living room. Beige wallpaper, a couch with patterned cushions, a lamp casting warm light. And then a girl appeared, tied to the chair, gagged, her eyes wide with terror. The camera lingered on her face. She blinked hard, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. Off camera, a voice spoke. "Come, gentle." Richard's voice. "You're safe here. Nobody will hurt you. I'll take care of you." The contradiction between his words and her bindings made seasoned detectives sick to their stomachs. They watched in silence, the weight of decades pressing down on them. When the tape ended, the room was quiet. One officer stormed out, slamming the door. Another covered her mouth, trembling. The lead investigator, Detective Monroe, sat still, his jaw tight, her fists clenched. "This isn't evidence anymore," he said. "This is proof." Proof of what? That Richard Hale wasn't just a predator. He was a sadist, a man who recorded his crimes like trophies. And the number on the tape, 12, suggested one horrifying truth. There were more. Armed with the discovery, detectives tore apart the Hale residence. They ripped up floorboards, dug into the crawl spaces, emptied closets and trunks, and they found them, 11 more tapes, each numbered, each sealed in plastic, each a chapter in a story no one wanted to read. The investigators matched tapes with journal entries. The handwriting described what the tapes showed. Tape 3, she liked the music box, said it reminded her of home. I told her she could hear it one last time. Tape 7, she fought, stronger than most. It made it difficult. I admired her spirit. Tape 9, quiet one, barely spoke. The silence was unnerving, almost peaceful. The words were detached, clinical. He wasn't writing about people. He was cataloging possessions. When authorities called the families of missing victims, the grief was unbearable. Amy Preston's parents collapsed when told their daughter's necklace had been found in Richard's basement. Brian Keller's mother screamed when investigators confirmed his sneakers were trophies. Dana Richards' brother punched a wall when he learned her voice could be heard faintly on one of the tapes. And yet, for some families, the confirmation, no matter how brutal, was a kind of closure. "We always knew," Amy's father whispered. But knowing and seeing are two different hells. The story spread nationally. News anchors struggled to contain their shock as they reported the details. The questions mounted. How had no one seen the signs? How had law enforcement missed the links? How could a man live 20 years as a respected neighbor while hiding a graveyard beneath his feet? He blended in perfectly. The tapes show planning, ritual, and control. Richard Hale wasn't sloppy. He was meticulous. That's why he got away with it. But there was one tape different from the rest. Tape 12. Unlike the others, it didn't end. It cut off mid-scene. The girl on the screen was struggling, her bindings loose, her eyes blazing with defiance. And then static. The recording stopped before the conclusion. Investigators couldn't confirm if she lived or died. Her identity remained a mystery. While cataloging evidence, detectives discovered something taped to the inside of Tape 12's case. A photograph. It showed the same girl from the footage. But this time she was outside, standing in front of a familiar landmark, a diner on Route 17. And scrawled on the back of the photo in Richard's handwriting were 3 words. She got away. The team froze. Was it possible? Had one victim escaped? So where was she now? And why hadn't she come forward? Detective Monroe slammed his hand on the table. Find her. She's the key. She might be the only one who knows how he operated. The diner in the photograph had closed years ago, but records showed it was popular in the early 2000s. Detectives canvassed old employees, waitresses, and patrons. Some remembered seeing Richard there. Others vaguely recalled a girl who seemed disheveled, eating quickly, eyes darting to the door. One waitress recalled a chilling detail. She was barefoot. Said she'd lost her shoes. We gave her socks from the lost and found. But when asked what happened next, the waitress shook her head. She left. Just disappeared. The idea of a living victim threw the investigation into chaos. She lived, she could testify. She disappeared, why? Was she hiding? Afraid? Or worse, silenced after the escape? Theories spiraled. Some believed Richard hunted her down later. Others thought she fled, never trusting authorities to protect her. Either way, Tape 12 became an obsession. Detectives replayed it over and over, hoping for a clue. A sign. A hint of where she went. While combing through Richard's computer files, analysts discovered an encrypted folder. After weeks of work, they cracked it open. Inside were scanned pages of journal entries, entries not found in the basement boxes. And one stood out. She slipped away. Clever girl. But she's out there carrying my secret. If they ever find her, the game changes. The entry was dated 2011, 10 years after Amy Preston disappeared. Detectives realized something horrifying. If she had escaped in 2011, she could still be alive. She could still be walking among them. And worse, Richard's words implied he knew where she was. Or had, at least for a time. The survivor wasn't just a witness. She was a target. In 2020, nearly a year after the discovery, Detective Monroe received an anonymous letter. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside was a single piece of paper. On it, typed in block letters, "I was number 12. I'm still here." The courtroom was full. Every bench taken. Reporters lined the back wall. Family members sat shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the man who had once been nothing more than a quiet neighbor, the one people trusted to feed their pets when they went away, the man who volunteered for community watch patrols. Now Leonard Clay stood in shackles. The very image of betrayal. He didn't flinch when the charges were read. Kidnapping. Unlawful imprisonment. Possession of evidence related to a missing persons case. His face was stone, as if the weight of 2 decades meant nothing. But for the Whitmore family, it meant everything. The prosecution painted a clear picture. The photographs, recovered from the hidden basement, were laid out one by one before the jury. Each image of Lydia Whitmore, alive years after the world assumed her dead, hit the courtroom like a hammer. Lydia smiling faintly. Lydia asleep under thin blankets. Lydia staring into the lens, her eyes hollow with time. The defense tried to spin it. They argued Leonard wasn't the kidnapper. That he was only keeping her. That someone else had been responsible for the initial abduction. But the question burned. If Leonard wasn't guilty, why keep her? Why hide her? Why photograph her again and again? Even more haunting, where had she gone? The drifter, gaunt and shaking, took the stand. He told the story no one wanted to hear. How Leonard had offered him shelter in exchange for silence. How he'd lived in that basement, hearing Lydia cry at night. How one evening the crying simply stopped. "I thought she left," he whispered. "But then I saw the jacket, he never let go of it. Like it still belonged to her." Every word silenced the room. The jury leaned forward. The Whitmore family wept. And Leonard? He didn't blink. It didn't take long. The jury found Leonard Clay guilty on every count that could stick. The judge, voice steady, sentenced him to life without parole. But the sentence didn't bring celebration. There were no cheers. No sighs of relief. Only quiet. The kind of silence that fills when justice feels incomplete. Because the photographs told one story, Lydia had lived. But the unanswered question lingered like smoke. Where was she now? Reporters filled the streets outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, microphones shoved at the Whitmore family. Her mother spoke softly, "We prayed for closure. But this isn't closure. This is another prison. He served his time in the shadows. And now we serve ours, in not knowing." The basement was sealed. The house condemned. But people in town said they could still feel it when they walked by. A presence, a heaviness. As though the walls themselves remembered. Neighbors no longer spoke Leonard's name. Parents told their children never to cut through his street. And the photographs? They were locked in evidence, but their images lived on in the minds of everyone who saw them. This is where the story ends, but not really. Because the truth about Lydia Whitmore is still missing. She could have escaped. She could have been taken again. She could have died in those walls, with no one ever knowing where Leonard placed her. All we know is that she mattered. She was here. And then she was gone. Leonard Clay may have been convicted, but the unanswered questions make this less a story of justice, and more a reminder of how fragile that word really is. Sometimes true crime doesn't end neatly. Sometimes it leaves scars deeper than the answers it provides. Lydia's story isn't just about a predator hiding in plain sight. It's about how communities can be fooled, how families are left searching, and how silence can stretch across decades. So the next time you glance at your neighbor, the one you trust, the one who waves from the driveway, remember this case. Because behind those walls, you never really know what story is being written. What do you think happened to Lydia Whitmore? Did she escape and start over? Or was there another secret Leonard never revealed? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, dark, haunting, and unforgettable, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Because the truth is never just in the past, it's waiting to be uncovered.